Great show for us today, all about antibiotics. And, what happens to your gut life colloid, terrain, when you're not maybe having considered that. I was just wondering if that's been the right approach at all. Imagine just for a moment all the drugs, of course, not just hundreds, but all, of course, including everything that's sort of over-the-counter, non-prescribed types of things, even supplement, which isn't food, aspirin, of course, common remedies for constipation that could have been given as antacids and stuff, which really, all of those things can really harm and alter the terrain of the life colloid, which is the environment that all the cells and life colloid exist within. And can the terrain itself be expressed properly if you don't have the proper diversity of the life colloid in your intestinal tract? That's a question. Imagine just for a moment that nutrient also broadcasts its effect, and even on a very small time frame, of course, creating a long-term transformation where somebody would have entirely wiped out the life colloid proteinaceous species, which is within, and that being the primary force that connects the brain to the gut and the gut to the brain, and provides support to the Harderian glands. That there are glands around your eyes, in the bone, and as large as the eyes are themselves as tissue, which is directly responsible for producing hormone melatonin that is so protective, necessary for all of the organs in the mesentery area. So really what's ecological, and how that all of those drugs perhaps create an inhibition and even compete where things are to have knocked nutrient out. So if you look into this, you could see podcasts that we've done a little bit more about mycotoxin and nitrogen addiction are good examples. But it would really be the culture, for instance, that's where the throat is, because it's full of enzyme in the back of the nose. And then the pancreas and gut. These are areas which truly, and also the lungs, could be impacted by temperature not being kept like it could be or should be. It could be hot box, for instance, or it could be, a reduced cold temperature. So if you're looking at the throat culture, for instance, it has to maintain a temperature, and it's got a great sensitivity, and it gets kicked off more after a few hours of its temperature being altered quite and not being kept. And suddenly, the life colloid there are transforming and pleomorphing, and they produce in the process of that cold shock protein and then, heat shock protein as well. And these are the things which is about fever, and that's not anything that's contagious at all. Only those symptoms come about because of what we're talking about. And so that fever, for instance, applies a bit of heat and cause cold shock protein. And the pleomorphic process and symptoms which exist can be not even talked about at the moment in modern medicine, but yet considered only as something, contagious, which it isn't. And then, interfering with a wrong idea and having an antibiotic, for instance, which is an antibiotic really from nature because it's just contaminated by solvent and other things. And so what the body produces, its own protein, is in response to certain stresses, of course, like it does include these heat and cold shock protein itself, and temperature, where a major function is where you're culturing life colloid. You can notice that, of course, when you're altering the temperature of things, you can produce more thermophilic life colloid or less. And so what's the stress where a protein should be but isn't, and that is something which is protecting your cells from toxic stress like selenium glutathione peroxidase, for example, which is only produced by L. salivarius and L. plantarum organisms that live in the intestinal tract and actually implant. And what happens when those things are gone? So cold shock protein sort of breaks things down, and heat shock protein builds things up. And in our species, you've got capital CARHSP1, and if somebody's got a pen and they want to write some things down. But these things, that's a protein that stabilizes neoplastic condition, like what's called a tumor necrosis factor. And protein, and so you could look at to see where's your TNF rate, where your blood is. You see that's, or the LIN28, which is a protein that looks at the capacity that cells have to be able to be reprogrammed, or the YB1 that is a protein which should be there where wound healing could be, and those are things which is being promoted by the body. So heat shock protein is found in our formula, and it's specific to actually, and cold shock protein found, of course, in plants which really have a high drought tolerance and maybe don't even require the sun to get their energy, like various heath bushes do in their roots, which you can find, abundant sorts of element. But if it's cold processed and micronized, these are things which are these heat and cold shock protein, which really does help the immune system. And you've got the cells, of course, which are sending and receiving these molecules, and this is really what's protecting the cell and assisting the cell to manage itself and have homeostasis. So the immune response engages these heat and cold shock protein and temperature and things, and explains this, okay? And so the stress that is part of all of this is really what's keeping your body natural where heat is from overheating and coming to be cooled again and these sorts of things. So what's released where the body reaches its temperature, like 38 to 41 degrees Celsius, for instance, or like when the temperature's raised, like 100, that would be about 100 degrees, 100.4 degrees, I think, to 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit or something, which, your body temperature could get up to 110, and then you go, oh, wow, that's really, but you see, these are within a relative capacity of the body being able to, through its molecular life colloid, apply various process to be able to clear up the mutual lived assistance of life colloid where things are within your body. So what happens when a toxin comes in that's called an antibiotic, and it completely wipes out all of the proteolytic life colloid in your intestine? And the antibiotic could be given without necessarily any reason, of course, because that's what we're talking about. And the greatest stress where something was, which just ended up as being a strain on the body, and wasn't it because somebody might have been on a salt drip and they ended up with edema, and that edema after 3 or 4 days ends up as septicemia, and isn't that the cause of that condition, where somebody would suddenly have had a lot of dysbiotic like life colloid in their blood, for instance. So where somebody would have entered into heat stress, and that could have been dangerous, of course, cooling and bringing the body down and its temperature and keeping that for about 3 days can help someone heal up, basically. And so otherwise heat exhaustion, and where heat is, and where heat could be turned on in the night wrongfully, and these sorts of things coming on and off, not letting somebody have their non-REM sleep like they should, and the body has to have dark to be able to repair. If it doesn't have that, it's going to be not too good. if you've got a little bit of excess white light at night or blue at night, that's going to be not right whatsoever. And having operations under, full spectrum light and having more red light is going to be more helpful for someone. But white and blue light will be the opposite, of course. So, there's something that's timed like chronic, meaning time, chronology, time and stress that comes along where somebody would have been exposed to doses of stresses, and how much it is that you have a health benefit because your body can develop a bit of a fitness about something, or, oh God, no, maybe it can't. Why? Because you're eating so wrong. A lot of fat, a lot of carbs, a lot of protein, wham, bam, and you're getting away somatostatin release. You didn't even know that, but you're hungry when you wake up in the morning. It's like, what's the reason for that? It is because of whatever you did the day before. It was to be set up that actually a stool would never pass through the body like it should, and always debris would have been in the intestine. And you can see that as it happens, because slow but sure people will lose their Harderian gland around their eyes. And after that, protein is not being made like selenium glutathione peroxidase, which is so vital to be able to keep your brain clean and produce, carbon dioxide and also nitrous oxide. But if you had antacid, are you going to have anything after that? No. Wow. So how's the brain going to clean? How's your thyroid going to function if you don't have any cleansing parts of where this goes on? It's like, and what goes on at night, that should have a proper Hertz cycle, which is a topic which we could talk a bit about. It's coming up, but it's really the life colloid that's beneficial, yes, and it's a drastic reduction of those and a disruption of things which can cause throat, gut, and intestinal sorts of life colloid imbalance. Because why? Well, because it impacts the terrain, and leftover material has existed there where that is, it's toxic. And once somebody gets a bit of an overgrowth and pathogenic sort of goes on where the intestinal throat is, or the orbital organ behind the back of your nose, which is full of enzyme and things. And it's typically the first thing to turn when somebody would have passed on, because it's a tissue which is most fermentive. And so opportunistic pathogen is really pleomorphic from the red blood corpuscle and tissue of the body where that circumstance is. And those are things which, because of the terrain, could just have continued sort of on unless it sort of halted. And people could end up with diarrhea and not be able to eat and things. And this is sort of something which the body's response is typical. And that's, somebody should be a fastician, meaning what do you do when the body is needing to heal itself? And typically it is somebody a bit fast during that period of time, and it's sort of a natural response where things go on. And what happens when somebody just had antibiotics, though, you see? Doesn't it all of a sudden become more antibiotic resistant? And Job's life colloid can cause a lot of this to be sort of healed up, where something like that could have occurred. And the pleomorphing otherwise would have gone on to mold, fungus, and yeast. And have you ever heard the tissue breaks down into that? And that there's a colloid of life cycle? And something is ecological or otherwise. No, it's not. It's not non-ecological. You've got a bit of an overgrowth of that going on. And what do you do to have natural pacifier and natural blood-borne inhibitors that block and stop all of that from having gone on? And in healthy blood, you've got colloid of life and a spore and double spore, and you've got degrees of that for sure. And otherwise, no, you really don't have any fibrillin and globulin there. And so, most people, they have a lot of fibrin and globulin there, and it's just like growing into things right before your very eyes, you see. So if you're looking at causing things where diarrhea would have been, you could just bring that on by heavy metals and solvents and substance such as forever molecules and stuff that impact the body's capacity to clot and these sorts of things. And it just creates a bushfire out of control where it's all burning and nothing is going to be left except whatever the toxin was that was applied, like Agent Orange or something. Antibiotics is really sort of your own wiping out the gut flora and all of the reduced diversity, which is supposed to be to give you proper immunity. And otherwise, what's that? It's an imbalance. And isn't that what an anti is? And we can't just target and have an idea like that, you see, because it's not what is proper. In nature, you've really got a pleomorphism going on, and the body doing everything it can to be able to restore the proper terrain. And how can it if you don't have these life colloid proteinaceous condition that produces substances for us, like we just talked about in this program, like selenium glutathione peroxidase, which don't you need that also for actually, like, having good, energy metabolism of the mitochondria of the cells? And isn't that something which you must have to actually even have some thyroid function and things? Yes, you do. And so, where someone could have not had this, because why? Well, because they were eating a lot of protein, fat, and carbs, heavy, all enzyme resistant. And it always raised somatostatin, and that blocked glucagon and insulin. It took a longer time for the stomach to empty itself. And how many times did you do that? Did you ever give your body an intestinal tract a rest, which is called Brunnering? If you didn't, doesn't matter whether you're plant-based or not, you can have ended up with a condition that you lost all the tissue around your eyes. And so the life colloid species diversification didn't exist like it could. And what goes on where that is? People lose their balance, they fall over, they have tendon damages much more easy, and they can have been consuming food that innocuously really had a lot of antibiotic and all sorts of stuff that was put into it, depending on the food. And isn't it that black box warnings now exist, yes, on a lot of that stuff, like permanent damage, permanent harm, including tendon ruptures, you see? And isn't certain medications like statins, for instance, not implicated in all of those sorts of conditions, and also central nervous system challenge? If you look at the fine print, you're going to see that. So if we're just only looking at antibiotic in the situation here, it sort of really could have affected the kidney function and severe allergic sorts of reactions, and life-threatening sorts of characterized difficulties could have been where breathing would have been, and swelling of the ankles, and lymphatics to edema in the face and the lips and the tongue and the throat. And isn't it carbon dioxide which opens that up? Isn't it nitrous oxide which opens that up? And how do you have any of that after you've, just had antacids and all sorts of things and antibiotics? So it's, how about like considering cleansing, ding, 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 and getting a greater stress off yourself, okay? And entering sort of and allowing those heat and cold shock proteins and managing the state where things are. There's such wonderful things to be able to manage things the way they are. And that's in your urine. You could be considered of doing some more urine therapy and sort of looking into that. So chronic stress, some of it is good, and up to a certain amount of shock, a little bit on both ends of the cold and the hot. And that's the reason why foam for red is so amazing. And the science of this has sort of really got antibiotics, of course, that eco-sterilise the life colloid terrain and block and stop the double spores from turning into fermentive sorts of organism. Otherwise, that terrain really will have caused some overgrowth to have been. And it's a selective resistance that goes on. And what do antibiotics do about that for you? And the manner of like your survival, and what is it that's going on where something all of a sudden becomes resistant to more the effect of what that is. you have a pleomorph fungus in yeast as a life cycle. Have you heard about this? It's a colloid life cycle. And you've got blood-borne inhibitors that block and stop the expression of that to have gone on where the blood is. And this is when your blood is more hygienic. So it's opportunistic that any pathogen like Clostridioides or Clostridioides difficile, and those are things which really aren't there where someone is in any overgrowth state whatsoever, where you have health. Otherwise, they are there, but they're just not in an overgrowth state whatsoever. And how did it get to be there? Well, we just talked about it. It's actually because temperatures and things wasn't kept proper. And so this is an observation, of course, over many years, and I don't see that anything has caused that to be crossed. And so a lot of animals could have ended up with things that was because of the way they were treated, and they all didn't make it because of cold and things that's like that. But there's no such thing as contagion. That's completely wrong. And so wiping out animals and things like that, just like they did to animals up in Canada, there's a big issue about that. But that's what's going on all around the world. And has anybody volunteered to all of that sort of thing? It's a bit of a bushfire of a controlledness itself. And wouldn't you consider that's an asymmetric warfare done on your own nation? Because your own nation doesn't want to be survived, because that's the bigger picture for someone as a hand above the nation. Because the nation is only run as a corpse, which, how bad is that? That's where the people's just sitting on your duff. But antibiotics can really affect your gut life colloid. And it could have really reduced the diversity and the imbalances of that. And something is more decentralized in your body and not so centralized in its thinking that you've got some magic substance or something and somebody's looking for that. It's a real condition that relates a lot more to the behavior that you have and how you're feeling inside and other things. Otherwise, it's a bit of a wildfire effect, the heat and the shock protein and things. But, of course, how does that go on when somebody has a antibiotic? It kind of really wipes out a lot of the effect that the body would have to actually properly cleanse itself, and then turns it into a bit more toxic condition, because where are you going to get B vitamin after that? Because it's really reduced a lot when you've had those things. And isn't it then after that, statins and all sorts of things could have been given and tendon damages go on, which is recognised, and like fluoroquinolines, which, you know, with the FDA, there is black box warnings now, how permanent damage, including tendon rupture and nerve damage and central nervous system challenge could have occurred. And so antibiotics and the effect that these things combine as a cocktail. And then, you know, what sort of effect does that have on your kidney function, yeah? And liver. And how can you see it? You can look at the tissue around the eyes. And you can see the tissue of the eyes itself. And now you're going to see what's going on where the nerve is, and it's typical that the pancreas, yes, is going to be compromised, and the Brunner glands down, that you've thought that's downstairs, but it's really upstairs of your Harderian glands, which is the organs around your eyes. So severe allergic sorts of condition goes on, and somebody isn't able to thrive, and so they can easily lose their balance and things that's like that. But typically you would see a certain swelling and internal sort of heat and congestion, but often toward the end just white patches on the tongue and things. And so innocuously could be things that were there in the food even that had these antibiotics in it. And so where a wizardness is and clostricides, difficile types of conditions that could have been picked up, and life colloid, all of that could have been flourishing wrongfully, of course, because the terrain wasn't kept right. And so it's a potential condition where it ends up with diarrhea and abdominal pain. And nobody could say that where antibiotics are given that it doesn't end up causing a resistance to antibiotic. Why? Well, because, like I said in the podcast here, there's a couple of other reasons why that could have been going on, and those are reasons which haven't been ruled out. And so is it because, shouldn't you have a proper approach? And do you have that if you haven't got a second opinion? No. You only have it as a result of getting a second opinion. Why? Well, because you have to have an observational reference point from where something is from some other point of view. And so, what goes on where somebody wouldn't say, hey, superbugs, haven't you heard about that? Expensive and impossible. Why? Because it's totally not the proper approach. Is it right, I guess, in this podcast, we're just asking you, what is the benefit if you just wiped out all the beneficial life colloids, and that's definitely linked, of course it is, to major sorts of health issues like not having enough proper antioxidant like melatonin, for instance. That's a primary protective antioxidant for the mesenteric diaphragm organs. So you don't tell me that somebody would have been at an increased risk for allergics, asthma, all sorts of inflammatory pancreas and meningia of the brain and bowel disease and cachexia, eventual illness. Yes? Because why? Because no approach is taken, because somebody's not looked at this as toxins. And is it going to be helped with toxins? God, no. If somebody's got toxin, you can't put more toxin in. You've got to support the body more because, typically it doesn't have proper nutrient. And did you take that approach? Well, if you didn't, what are you doing? Are you supporting nature? No. Did anything that you did cause fibrin and globulin to be raised in the body? Yes or no? If it caused fibrin and globulins to be raised, that's obvious. That's not cell rejuvenation whatsoever, because it would have had to raise albumin. And a program is designed to be able to raise albumin. Yes, because it's a super transporter in your body. And that's the very substance that can help you clear up everything, okay? So what happens to kids under 2 where they're given antibiotics? Truly, for children, they're at a greater risk. Why? Well, because it takes them 2 years to be able to recover. And is that just when afterward there's a greater, more onset of asthma, like respiratory types of allergies, and eczema for the skin, and celiac disease? And don't tell me that's not bacteremia and things, and too much stuff gone on, which is totally not natural at all. So are you an anti-naturalist? Because otherwise that just doesn't sound right. So whatever's long-term, which is a side effect, it's a direct effect, it's all wrong approach. And wouldn't you say antibiotics given to kids because it's going to take them 2 years to recover from it, whereas it takes adults about 7 months? And the risk that's going on where that all is due, where is the grand unified totality in that as a quanta? That's called gut. So the life colloid balance, where colloid of life is, and double spore and spore, got to be there in the blood. And do you see those things under good magnification? Yes, you can, but you've got to have around about, maybe 20,000 magnification. That's pretty small. But why isn't it that it's so easy to make that? You're just making light small enough to be able to illuminate everything. So the body cavity, otherwise we're down on this level, is a cavity, of course, in the life colloid itself, and that's a space where conduction exists. And it's crucial for your immune system and the metabolics of the brain-gut connection and how it is that the appendix is part of the brain upstairs. So life colloid in number really is seen in live blood cell when you're looking at this, and the timing of anything that would be given, like antibiotics or something, you could have looked at this over the long term and to see this association, which I'm not talking to you about. So if a child really shouldn't be given anything that's like that because it's a total falsehood based upon some slippery slope, that something could be contagious or something was going on like that, which didn't even give you the proper insight, like what this is in this podcast. Would have that been just like a bandwagon appeal that somebody ran with? And so antibiotics would never used to be. And don't you think that those are the things which will have caused quite a bit of an effect where the stomach is, and where crampedness would be, or gastrointestinal conditions, you see? And so it's really the microflora where you are that absolutely really is helping where all of this is. And you've got, in our BCT formula, for instance, you've got, and also in the Gouda, you've got life colloid that can just jumpstart with the life colloid diversity, which is really needed, and the beneficial life colloid where the mix is. And it's a brain cognitive decline otherwise. And it's a loss of the gut having its proper tight junctions hit. So couldn't it be that you could have just done a zonulin test and looked at the platelet that existed to see that if you've got your gut sealed, because if you do have a gut seal, then you've got a blood-brain barrier as well. And so could things have just leaked where it shouldn't have? Yes, they do. And so that's the reason why you better have a condition of getting more hygienics for your blood. So the conditions that's associated with all of this, where antibiotics would have been given, it's a certain thing that you're going to see a lot of asthma and rhinitis, that's, inflammation of the nose and throat, and weight issues where obesity is, and food allergy. And then attention toward all of that and missing the root cause of things. And so looking at the nature of the cause of and effect of things. You're looking at the nature to be able to understand the cause and effect of things. So looking at and listening into these podcasts is really important, because we often are talking a bit about leaky gut and how do antibiotics would have impacted that. You've got this intestinal tight junction fit and these proteins like we've been talking about. And if you've got tests that look for this zonulin 1 or this occludin and claudins, those are the proteins more or less. They've got this giving you a normal surface protection. And so the membranes of the cells and body all are protected from tinier small substances. And so, you've got a proper, barrier versus no. You've just increased the permeability of the gut. And is this something that's gone on? Because it's certain. And don't tell me that antibiotics didn't cause that. It does. And so where's your natural immune system where all of this is in the picture? So if antibiotics can, stop and block all these TJ proteins like zonulin and occludin and claudin, which should line the gut, and it totally, if you don't have that, you've got a weakened blood-brain barrier, also, intestinal barrier. It's weakened. So what happens when that went on? Nobody thought about it. God, you've got more like a cocktail going on. And don't tell me that that's increased permeability. It sure is. And so is there drugs there trying to stop that? Yes. And look, this is just disastrous. A cocktail that's just tuned wrong. Why? There was no approach. No one gave this a handle like it can. And a diagnostic, that's a handle, and it's a handle. And do you have a proper handle where you are? Well, if you've got a leaky gut, you better correct that, because if you don't, it's going to be the cause of a lot of other things like we're just talking about here. And so nobody's going to say that where somebody is got lactose deficiency, it isn't because they've got haven't got proper life colloid in their intestine. Generally, they don't have any life colloid in their intestine. And isn't that where eyes are and nerves, slow but sure, it induces a great sort of cataract-like activity, yes? And all proteins like dextrin from starches and stuff can't be broken down proper, and these particulate with fats and stuff end up in the eyes and in the lens and things, and inducing cataract and stuff. It's really the blood-brain barrier that would have become permeable. Why? Because what we're talking about right now, how do you know that if you ate flesh, it wasn't, the animals weren't given all these antibiotics? And how do you know if there's inflammation where the gut is, that it isn't because you've got this lack tight junction fit? Because why? Well, because life colloid component, which should be, and giving you these liposaccharides and, you know, and things, you've got inflammatory molecules otherwise, like these cytokines and things, so those can enter the bloodstream. And neuroinflammation and the potential damage that does, it's all these endotoxins and inflammatory markers which can trigger neuroinflammation and inflammation of your brain. And don't tell me that there's a condition of dementia, also all of the blood vessels of the brain. So are you going to say that because somebody's got a leaky gut, or you didn't even look to see if they have a leaky gut, this is just off the chart? Why didn't you? Because it would be just logical, and not logical if you didn't. It would be logical if you looked at the blood and you could see what is the characteristics of the blood. Good. Otherwise, you know, somebody's just sitting there and they're getting more and more brain fog, and it's more difficult for them to be able to focus. And isn't this just really, you know, a neurodegenerative type of disease? Isn't this sort of like the scarring that could be seen when anybody does a bit of a CAT scan? You could see in the brainstem there's lesions where the intestine is, like Dr. Hammer ever learned back in the early 80s and a bit before this. And isn't it life colloid that's stressed by antibiotic contaminant and flesh food and stress that people have, and then gastrointestinal conditions, and then substances that they're given and things that the cause of the release of these cytokine sort of signaling molecules that mediate and regulate, or it's supposed to, the immunity, but absolutely are turning it off and not letting it function like it should. And how are you going to make neurotransmitters and all of those sorts of things when you've, you know, you've got this condition going on and there's a permeability going on that's leaky? And if you're listening, of course, what we've been talking about in this podcast, it really is, what is the effect of the antibiotic and how does that impact the, you know, leaky gut? We've just said it really impacts it a lot. How does it impact the blood-brain barrier? And if those parts of our body aren't functional, do you have any albumin left after that, which would transport stuff through the brain like it should? No. And so it becomes very deficient, doesn't it? Toxins go in and something really doesn't come back out again. It's the primary concern where infants are, of course, and indirectly affecting brain development and thyroid types of conditions. And is that what went on up in a certain part of life, and suddenly people become more crippled more? And this is really a condition, isn't it? And what is the life colloid gut disruption that suddenly could be broken through more so somebody could learn how to do things? But the lacked efficacy and the worn reasoning, and wherever something was, the toxins that went in an early age and the antibiotics that were also, and don't tell me that all of that penicillin didn't interrupt, and the delicate balance that's developed and the gut life colloid terrain, and you can't say that isn't something which could easily be seen, because you're looking at the Harderian glands, which is around your eyes, and you know, you're looking at the Brunner gland, that's one of the largest organs in your body, And these must function together. And how can they, if somebody was just eating a complex carbs, heavy fat and protein diet, which was totally enzyme resistant, and did that for such a long time, and you got stone in the pancreas, and did you do anything to get rid of that? No. And so, you know what I mean? I mean, because I think that most people aren't really looking at the bigger issue and helping clear up things to restore things, especially pancreas. I think these are the things which, if you do heat and cold therapy and things, I think you can have a great benefit if you look into what natural pathogens that can happen and the raising of those things properly, and thinking about the, improving the terrain of your body. There's three things, if you're going to take a pen out right now, and these are the things which impact. First, of course, you are impacting, by doing gut cell rejuvenation, proper conductivity. And that's the ability to pass on a charge. Second, you're improving the negative redox, which means the amount of antioxidants that you have there to guard against radical oxygen species and things. And three, you've got proper parts of hydrogen existing between the inside and the outside membrane. And when you have this, you've got a proper terrain, and this is a way to be able to look to see how is the terrain impacted. If you're rejuvenating, then you're improving this terrain. Anyway, I really hope that you've got something from this podcast today, and I really would enjoy that you have loved this and tune into some podcasts that's coming up on other topics. Love, guys. Catch up to you in a future day.